Good afternoon. Let me get a cup of tea. So I was going to do a rant, and then I was like, it's so boring to watch people rant. So I figured, let's do a rant. And I'm going to show you guys my brooch and my bracelet collection. And I'm going to show you this just in case. Now, these guys, I will tell you, are just, these are store-bought pitzels, and they are not the fancy kind, which do look like snowflakes or spider webs and have really cool designs. Pitzels, you can buy these machines. They look like a little waffle iron for making them. There's also this thing, it almost looks like a tortilla press. They're the old school kind, and they have really intricate designs. Like this is a company called Pepe's, and these are actually very good. If you see them, these are delicious. But they're not the fancy pitzels. And my dog is right here. Because apparently dogs, pitzels are their natural food. You know, I'm assuming that packs of dogs go out hunting for pitzels in the wild. Come up here so people can see it. Come on. Come on. There we go. Look at the camera. Say hi. Okay, now you're shy today. He's usually not shy if there's any kind of food involved. So, all right, there we go. All right, so this is technically a two-subject video. We're going to talk about my brooch collection and bracelet collection, which is actually much smaller. And look, guys, I'm sure you remember this. Remember this from the video of the sewing machine? This was in the bottom of the sewing machine. And this is just this lovely, this is a pin or a hair flower. It's not vintage. It came on like a bag or something that I bought from like 9 West, like in the early 2000s. But I kept it because it's awesome for the hair. In fact, let's model it. Let me see. Let me take it off and put it on my hair. Maybe not. Hold on. Oh, there we go. I look like a madam in a brothel. Like an 1830s brothel. Look, we just lost something. What did we lose? Oh, we lost a dress clip. All right, we'll start with that because I think this is going to keep falling. I love this. I got this from Redbird Vintage, and it's really lovely. It's a dress clip, and it's so cute. And obviously it would go, if I had a vintage dress on, it would go right here. It is missing a couple of the rhinestones, but that's okay. It's old, and it's still so beautiful. Look at the detail. And yes, it's missing a couple of rhinestones, but I don't care. It's so beautiful. So back to our board. So let's start over here. This is a brass bracelet from the 1920s that belonged to my grandmother. Apparently, back in the 20s, copper and brass had this really strange comeback, which is kind of weird because you would think it would be the Depression that these would be popular because they would be cheaper metals, but it wasn't. It was the 1920s. And I always really love this bracelet, and it's interesting the way it lays on the arm because it folds like this. I mean, it's just so gorgeous. I love this thing. And I should polish it, but I kind of like it with the patina too. It's so nice. And unfortunately, it's a little bit delicate, but I still like it. All right, this bracelet we talked about in the other video with the earrings. These are the stones, these semi-precious stones that are in their kind of not quite cut and polished state. They're kind of half and half, and these were from Brazil. This bracelet, I'm going to show you guys a close-up of it because the rhinestones are so gorgeous. Whoop. This I got from Redbird Vintage. And as my understanding is, this would be called Brutalist. I think it's from the 1950s. I don't think it's from the 40s. It might even be later, 60s or 70s, but I loved it because I didn't really have anything that was Brutalist. Let me see how close I can get you guys to this. Can you see how gorgeous that is? And I've only worn it once because it's one of those things like, what do you wear that with? You kind of have to be dressy to pull it off, but I wore it anyway. And then this watch doesn't work anymore. It was my mom's, and it's her vintage watch, so I held on to it. So let's talk about some of the other things. Maybe switch this way. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so this is actually a necklace, and it's a type of pottery that's from the area of France that my family's from. It's from Longwy. This is probably 60s or 70s, but this was my Christmas pin last year, and there's actually another one of these balls over here, and I have to fix it because it came off. This, we also already talked about that pin. This pin is the one that matches the set that my grandmother also got in Brazil. That's like it's like onyx and wood and gold, and it's 18 karat gold. It's gorgeous. I don't have the bracelet up here because the bracelet's catch actually can't be hung because of the way it's made. It's a snap-in catch, so I can't really hang it. This is also from Redbird Vintage. Again, this is probably 60s, maybe even 70s, maybe even 80s. It's, you know, imitation pearl brooch, but it's so pretty, and I wear this sometimes in the winter because it is so gorgeous. This brooch here was my mother's, and it's my autumn leaf brooch, and I usually put it on my jacket in autumn. It's so pretty. This here, really to me, I think is more like a tie tack, and I think this was meant to go across like the bow on a pussy bow blouse. And then this here I think is 1980s. This might be 80s does 40s actually. And it's actually a piece of shell, and it's kind of pretty. It's got a deco kind of style. This is another piece I think is less of a brooch and more like back in the 80s, stick pins came back for a brief period of time. And the way they were being worn was they were being worn in like if you had a collar and you tied it, you put the stick pin in. And it was kind of funny because it was like when women went back to work in offices, and more women were going into the job force. So that's a good segue to talk about our difficult relationship with vintage, because I do get asked, like people ask me why I like the 40s. People ask me like, oh, would you like to go back to the 40s if you could, blah, blah, blah. I don't think I would want to go back to the 40s if I could, for lots of reasons. Could I live there if I woke up tomorrow and, you know, what is it, a TARDIS? A TARDIS had moved me to the 1940s. Yeah, I could live there because I know how to work the stuff. I know how to cook the food, and I know how to work the stoves and, you know, how radiators work and things like that. But I wouldn't want to live there. And that's the thing about vintage. I know a lot of people in the vintage community get these questions like, were you born in the wrong decade? You know, like all these strange questions. I don't wish to return to the 1940s. What I like about the 1940s are twofold. Fashion-wise, the fashions of the 1940s were made for my body. I am kind of a pear shape, but I would say I'm a modified pear shape because I have a fairly strong shoulder line. So I'm not quite an hourglass, which was the shape of the 40s. I'm more like a pear shape, which was also the 40s was a great time if you're pear shaped because there's so much volume on the bottom of the dresses that it really can be camouflaging. And then when you add the shoulder pads, it balances out the line of your body. So that was my first reason that I love the 1940s was when I was, you know, 18, 19, 20 in the early 80s and mid 80s, there were so many vintage clothes from the 40s floating around because people were getting rid of their stuff. And every single dress, and I was thin back then, I was really thin back then. And every single dress just was, it was like it was made for me. Like, and every time I would wear a vintage dress, I would get tons of compliments from people in this vintage dress. In fact, I'm going to dig it out. I have some photos of myself in vintage clothing. There's a really nice picture of me in this vintage black lace dress, and I'm sitting in a bar, and for some unknown reason, I have my leg on some man that I don't remember his name. I don't think I really knew him, but it was the 80s. I can't really, there's no excuse, but it was the 80s. But I always got compliments on my vintage clothes, which is why I love them. Now, keep in mind, I didn't go full vintage back in those days. There was a habit that was shared by myself and many of my friends, which is we would go buy these beautiful vintage dresses, and then we would wear them with black tights and combat boots. And I still think that part of the 80s does 40s movement was because designers always looked at street style, and that's what my friends were wearing. And then by the 90s, it's funny, we were getting more clothes from the 60s, so all these like mini dresses were in style, and baby doll dresses suddenly came into style from the designers. But all of us were wearing them because we would go to the thrift stores, and there were tons of mini dresses, and they were so cheap and so cute. We would buy mini dresses. And then all of a sudden, the baby doll dress came into style in the early 90s during the grunge movement, which is kind of funny that like they, you know, designers get credit for that, but I think they were really copying street style. And we were buying our clothes at thrift stores because we didn't have any money because we were poor because of Reaganomics. Yeah, we're not going to get too political, but a little bit. So another thing that I would not want to go back to the 40s is, let's talk about that. If you were African American or a person of color in the 40s, things were not good for you. I mean, there was rampant racism. And it was so institutionalized that if you listen to a song like Chattanooga Choo Choo, which I love the song itself, but there's the line where he's like, pardon me, boy, is that the Chattanooga Choo Choo, track 29, boy, you can give me a shine. He's not talking about a little kid. He's talking about an adult African-American male. And it was in a song, and nobody thought, like, a song that got played on the radio constantly. Nobody thought anything of it. It was so institutionalized, the racism. And then there was the homophobia, which is a whole nother thing. Homosexuality was illegal. You could be put in jail for homosexuality. The laws were really strange because they didn't seem to cover lesbianism for some reason. There was some coverage of lesbianism, but it was very different than actual male homosexuality, which was considered not only a criminal offense, but a mental disorder. Lesbianism was also considered a mental disorder. There was, I guess, asexuality wasn't really talked about back then, but they did talk about people being frigid, having no sexual desire, which I think now we would really define as people that were like asexual or just non-sexual. The other thing was, I mean, if you were trans, you had to be a drag queen. There wasn't really a trans community. There had been surgeries, sexual reassignment surgeries, but they were still very risky. They were not widely available. So if you were a man that felt that you were actually a woman, that you were born a woman, you kind of became a drag queen. That's what you did for a living. You became a female impersonator. And you had to be part of a show, because if you weren't, it was illegal for you to dress like a woman if you weren't a woman. Which sounds so weird when I say it now, but you know. The other thing, but one of the good things I must say about the 40s, good and bad, is when we went to war, the nation decided to tell women that we need you in the war with the war work, and you are capable of doing these jobs that we used to give to men. The sad thing is even though this was it was really a high watermark for pre-feminism. When the 50s rolled around, we went back like 20 years. What people don't talk about when they talk about the fabulous 50s is they don't talk about was one of the highest incidents of divorce in the history of the U.S. up to that point. And not just divorce. People just deserted each other. Men would just like leave. There was a very high amount of suicide among women. And it doesn't get talked about very much, but there was also a lot of mental illness. And most of this mental illness was diagnosed as being manic depression, right? Even though many of these women probably were not bipolar, which is the new term for manic depression. They most likely were depressed because they had an income, they had a life of their own, and people were telling them on a regular basis that they were heroes, that the work that they did was significant and important, and I'm sure they found their lives very fulfilling. And then the war's over, and it's like, okay, well, put on an apron, go back in the kitchen and make me a sandwich. And that was your life. And then if you said, I'm unhappy, they were like, well, you need to go see a doctor. We think you must have manic depression. You must have female hysteria, because the uterus apparently causes mental illness. Who knew? And that's not something that's often talked about, how really unhappy women were in the 50s. In fact, the feminine mystique was actually written in the 50s. Betty Friedan started the original writings of the feminine mystique in the 50s. And women were incredibly unsatisfied. And why wouldn't they be? You went from war work and being considered like a hero and part of, rah, 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 this propaganda to, okay, well, we're done now. Now you can go back to being, seen and not heard. And, you know, just look pretty, honey, and all of that. And it must have been absolutely devastating for women at that time. I can't even imagine. So that's my little rant about vintage. I love the clothing, don't love the politics. So until next time, guys, we're going to be doing a lot more cooking videos. I got a lot of cooking coming up this week, so this might be kind of the last vintage clothing rant type thing. If I run out of something, I might just show you some of the pattern ideas that I have for my fabric. And then we're going to be the end of Vlogmas, and the 26th I'm taking off, and I'm not sure when I'll be back on video. This is surprising. I'm surprised I got as much done as I did, though. I got to be honest. I'm a little surprised at myself that I was able to get this much done. So I'm actually pretty happy. But if you like these videos, please like, subscribe, ring the bell, and please leave me comments because I love comments. And did my hair for you guys, even though I did foam rollers. It didn't turn out too well. My hair is too long and I need to get it colored. But anyway, until next time, I'll see you on the flip side. Bye.